Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. You arrive in a new country, Canada. You've got maybe $20 in your pocket. You barely speak the language, and you're living in someone's basement. Seems almost unbelievable as a starting point, right?
Absolutely. It's the kind of beginning you see in movies, maybe. But this was Robert Herjavec's reality. And somehow from that point, he claws his way up to selling his first company for, what was it, over $30 million.
$30.2 million, yeah. It just completely flips the script on what we usually think about
It
success.
really does. We're constantly surrounded by stories of quick fixes, overnight sensations, endless motivation hacks. But Herjavec's story forces us to ask something different.
Like what happens when you just bet everything on discipline, self-discipline, that quiet, almost invisible force?
Exactly. The force that didn't just sort of influence his path, but really defined it. It's the core of his journey.
And that's really our mission today in this deep dive. We want to get past the shiny TV version, the Shark Tank persona, the surface stuff.
Right. We're digging into the sources we have. Specifically, insights from a video called Robert Herjavec, The Power of Iron Discipline, to pull out those key nuggets of knowledge.
We know you're curious about how someone actually navigates those kinds of extreme challenges to reach that level of success. So we're here to kind of give you the shortcut.
Yeah, distill it down. Avoid the information overload, but still get the really surprising facts, the practical stuff about that discipline mindset.
We want to understand the why. Why did he make those choices? What connects those early struggles to the principles he still lives by?
And how does that apply beyond just him? How can those insights actually mean something for you in what you're trying to build or achieve?
Okay, so let's unpack it. Let's start at the beginning with this moment that really seemed to forge his entire understanding of vulnerability. He was only 8.
Yeah, 8 years old. And he gets his first real gut punch understanding of poverty. But it wasn't like not having enough food or feeling the cold in that basement they lived in.
No, it was something much deeper, wasn't it? More emotional.
Definitely. It was seeing his father, watching his father come home from a factory job in Toronto, completely silent.
And this wasn't just any father. This was a man who'd stood up to the communist regime back in Yugoslavia, right? Jailed like 22 times for it.
Exactly. A man with immense spirit, a real dissident. And now, in this new country, he's working in a factory, and he comes home utterly crushed.
Why?
Because some supervisor mocked him, called him stupid for not speaking English.
Wow. So the pain wasn't just the insult or being tired from work, it was the helplessness.
That's it. The absolute inability to defend himself, to protect his own dignity in a language he didn't command. That specific moment, that specific feeling, it just burned itself into Robert's mind. It changed everything about how he saw money, vulnerability, dignity.
It's such a stark image. This defiant man silenced by a language barrier, working for, what, $76 a week?
$76. And remember, they'd arrived with literally one suitcase and $20. No safety net. Nothing.
So seeing his father, the strong figure, brought so low by something so basic, that redefined money for him.
Completely. It stopped being about fancy things or dreams.
Mm.
Money became about protection, a shield, a way to ensure that kind of humiliation, that powerlessness, never happened again to him or his family.
That really drives home how our core values often get forged in those really intense emotional moments, doesn't it?
For sure. And it makes you think, doesn't it? What moments in your own life, maybe from childhood, maybe later, have really shaped your own feelings about security or independence or what dignity means to you?
Yeah, because for Herjavec, this wasn't just a sad story he told later. It was the root, the absolute starting point for his entire drive.
And that drive translated directly into how he viewed money. It wasn't the typical view at all.
Right, it wasn't about buying stuff or getting rich just to be rich. He said it was about protection.
Exactly. Pure protection. So while other kids were, playing outside, doing normal kid things, he was already working, delivering newspapers super early in the morning, washing dishes in restaurants after school.
He learned it firsthand then. That money was the buffer, the shield against feeling helpless like his dad did.
And that's such a key distinction. His drive wasn't envy. He wasn't looking at rich people thinking, I want that yacht. He was looking at the vulnerability of the poor, that poverty of the soul he witnessed, and thinking, I will never let that happen to me or my family.
It's a survival instinct, really, not an accumulation strategy.
Absolutely. And his dad reinforced that. He had this saying, right? If you complain, it means you've accepted your situation, you've surrendered.
Wow. That's intense. Not just don't whine, but like a whole philosophy.
It was. It was about defiance, refusing to be defined by your circumstances, never surrendering.
And that refusal, that became his bedrock. It explains why even later, as a multimillionaire, he still felt this shadow.
Yeah, he talked about that haunting thought. I always felt like I was one bad decision away from going back to that basement.
That's incredible for someone who's achieved so much, that kind of paranoia, as he called it.
But it wasn't destructive paranoia. It
Wow.
didn't make him greedy. It fueled the discipline. It fueled the relentless preparation.
So while other kids were partying in high school, he was planning.
Planning. While others were skipping college lectures, he was working 2 jobs, saving, learning,
And then making that crazy decision to take a tech job for no pay.
for 0 salary. Because he knew instinctively that the knowledge, the experience he'd gained there, that was the real currency. That was worth millions down the road. It was an investment in himself that no one could take away.
That focus on long-term value over immediate reward, that's discipline right there.
It really is. And the payoff, the validation, came when he sold BRX Systems, that $30.2 million deal in 2000.
Most people would be popping champagne, buying a Ferrari.
Right. But his first thought wasn't celebration. It was visceral. It was, my family will never live in a basement again.
It always came back to that money is the tool, the shield, not the end goal.
It just hammers home those deep emotional drivers. It wasn't about ego or winning in the conventional sense. It was fulfilling that promise, protecting his family from that specific fear.
So it makes you ask yourself, doesn't it? What's your basement? What are you building away from? What deep down fear or value is really pushing your buttons, maybe without you even realizing it?
Identifying
Yeah.
that can unlock a lot of clarity.
Okay, so we see how that mindset was forged. Now, how did that translate into his actual career path? Because it wasn't exactly conventional, especially getting into tech.
No, not at all. And this really challenges that whole follow your passion narrative we hear so much. He didn't go into tech because he loved computers as a kid.
What was his degree in, again, English Lit and Police Sci?
Yep. Graduated in the early 80s.
Mm.
No coding skills.
Yep.
No MBA. Nothing on his resume that screamed tech guy.
So why tech?
Simple pragmatism. In his words, it was a door that wasn't locked. After getting rejected from dozens of other jobs, tech felt like an opening, maybe just a crack, but an opening.
He talks about opportunity whispering, not knocking.
Exactly. And he was hungry enough, determined enough after all those rejections to listen for that whisper.
Mm.
He just needed a way in, even if it wasn't the perfect dream job.
And then came that gamble we mentioned, the zero-pay job.
Right. 6 months, working for free at this Canadian tech firm, selling, what was it, IBM mainframe emulation boards.
Yeah, explain that a bit. What are those?
Okay, so back then, big companies used these huge, powerful computers called mainframes, but they were kind of isolated. Emulation boards were basically hardware, like adapters or translators, that let newer computers or networks talk to those big old mainframes.
So, like, essential plumbing for corporate IT, but not exactly glamorous.
Not glamorous at all, but vital. And he just threw himself into it. Came in early, stayed late, asked tons of questions, volunteered for all the grunt work nobody else wanted.
He was basically absorbing the business from the inside out.
Totally, like a sponge. And he saw it clearly. I wasn't getting paid, but I was getting something no one could ever take from me, experience.
That wasn't sacrifice in his mind, it was investment. Smart investment.
Incredibly smart. Prioritizing knowledge over immediate cash. That set him up. He learned the ropes, proved his worth, and started climbing the ladder there at LogicQuest, eventually becoming general manager.
And then he takes the leap, founds his own company in 1990, BR Customs,
Then where does he start it?
back in a basement, the irony.
Right. But this time, it's his basement, his terms, a symbol of creation, not hardship, and he bootstrapped it completely.
Using credit cards, answering calls himself, installing firewalls on weekends. The whole startup grind.
Total grit. And this was way before cybersecurity was this huge, hot industry. He saw a need, a real problem businesses were facing, and just dug in to solve it. No venture capital, no fancy offices, just raw effort.
And that decade of grind leads to the AT&T Canada acquisition in 2000, $30.2 million.
Which, again, he stresses wasn't luck. It was the direct result of seeing a future others missed and betting everything on himself to build it.
But even that wasn't the finish line for him.
Not even close. He called it a reset. Just 3 years later, 2003, he launches the Herjavec Group.
This time focusing on enterprise cybersecurity and managed services. Can you break those down a bit?
Sure. Enterprise cybersecurity is the big stuff, protecting the huge, complex computer networks and sensitive data of large corporations, Fortune 500 companies. Managed services means his company essentially takes over running and maintaining those critical IT security functions for the client.
So again, not the flashy consumer tech, but the essential, maybe even boring back-end stuff that big businesses absolutely rely on.
Exactly. And the Herjavec Group became massive, one of Canada's biggest IT security providers, over $200 million in annual revenue.
What was the key to that sustainable growth? He wasn't just chasing trends.
No, he had these clear strategies for the long game. First, like you said, obsess over the boring problems. Solve the real fundamental vulnerabilities, not just the hype.
That provides real, lasting value.
Totally. Second, don't scale too early.
Yeah.
He poured every penny back into the business for years. Talent, infrastructure before taking big paydays himself. Incredible discipline.
Building a solid foundation instead of rushing growth.
Right. And the third one, which goes right back to his core values. Reputation is more valuable than revenue.
That story about turning down $1 million contract.
Yeah, because he felt the client was shady. His reasoning, one bad client can cost you 10 good ones. That takes serious guts. Prioritizing integrity over easy money.
It all comes back to the identity, doesn't it? He wasn't just CEO Bob.
Never. He was always, in his mind, a refugee who couldn't afford to fail. Even rolling in dough, he's up at 5:30 a.m., answering emails, leading sales calls. The habits were ingrained. He said he was trained by hardship.
And that mindset ultimately led to the APAP's Partners deal in 2021, right? Selling a majority stake.
Yeah, which again wasn't just cashing out. It was strategic. Proof that his long-term build-it-to-last approach worked and positioned the company for even bigger scale. For listeners, Apax is a private equity firm. They invest, help grow companies, often aiming for a bigger return later. It's about accelerating growth.
So it really makes you think, are you chasing the shiny new thing? Or are you focused on solving those boring, fundamental problems, building something solid, putting reputation first? How could that apply to your own goals?
It's a powerful lens to look through. And this internal compass, this drive, it wasn't just a mindset. It was built into his daily actions, the architecture of his discipline.
Yeah, let's get into that because for him, discipline wasn't just an idea. It was, like you said, almost biological or rhythm.
Totally. Still waking up at 5:30 a.m. sharp every day, no matter what.
Yeah.
Even after the millions started rolling in.
Still answering his own emails,
Yeah.
making his bed in hotels. Why?
He had this great line. Discipline isn't about doing more. It's about doing the right things, especially when no one's watching. That speaks to deep integrity, doesn't it? Internal accountability.
It really does.
Yeah.
But where did that rigid structure come from? Was he just naturally that organized?
Actually, no. He admits he's not naturally tidy or system-oriented. He built the discipline because he came from chaos.
The refugee household, the financial stress, the unpredictability.
Exactly. Yeah. That kind of environment leaves scars. He learned early on, if he didn't control his environment, it would absolutely control him. So discipline wasn't a preference, it was a shield, a survival mechanism against that uncertainty he hated.
So he engineered systems out of necessity? What kind of specific habits are we talking about?
Really practical stuff like color-coded calendars. Sounds simple, but he uses them religiously for clarity and structure. Meal prepping every Sunday takes decision fatigue out of the week, saves time.
Makes sense. What else?
A big one. A 24-hour cooling off rule for emotional decisions. If he's angry, upset, overly excited, he waits a full day before making a big call. Prevents impulsive mistakes.
That's smart. Very deliberate.
And maybe the most powerful one is his don't miss twice rule.
How does that work?
Simple idea, huge impact. If he skips a workout today, fine, it happens. But he absolutely, positively does not skip it tomorrow. Missed a deadline, don't miss the next one.
So it's not about being perfect, but about immediate course correction, preventing a downward spiral.
Exactly. It's a built-in mechanism to maintain momentum. These aren't just quirks. They're engineered habits to reinforce discipline constantly.
And this whole system leads him to approach success very differently than most, right? He's not chasing the dopamine rush.
No, he's chasing clarity. You hear other CEOs bragging about 80-hour work weeks, running themselves ragged. Herjavec brags about consistency.
He plays the long game. Others burn out in a few years. He's compounding success over decades.
It's a completely different mindset. Sustained effort over short, intense bursts. Long-term value creation is the goal.
And this even shows up in his parenting.
Absolutely. He doesn't just hand his kids cash. He gives them routines, teaches them to plan their week, review mistakes, the importance of being on time.
Because, as he says, you can't outsource character. You can't gift grit.
Exactly. Discipline is a life skill, fundamental, not just for business.
And here's the fascinating paradox you mentioned. The discipline actually creates freedom for him.
Right. It sounds counterintuitive. But in a world yelling for your attention, full of distractions and excuses, he sees discipline as rebellion.
Choosing focus over scrolling, intention over impulse.
Precisely. And even in peak Shark Tank fame, he stayed grounded.
Yeah.
No entourage, no over-the-top parties, no 20 fancy cars. He just wakes up, works out, wins in silence.
That silence, those daily non-negotiable choices, that's where the power is.
It completely reframes discipline, not as a cage, but as the key to real autonomy and peace.
So, thinking about these systems, how could you apply them? Are you chasing dopamine or clarity? What small, consistent habit could you start today to build your own rhythm of discipline?
Yeah, it's less about huge leaps and more about those small daily wins. And digging even deeper, his big decisions, they weren't just driven by discipline or logic. They were rooted in something even more personal.
The promise to his father.
Exactly. Not a promise to shareholders or the market. A promise rooted in the memory of his father's dignity.
Even when his dad had almost nothing, he carried himself with pride, right? Shaving every day, polishing shoes, ironing shirts.
Walking tall, even with only 2 coins in his pocket. It was that lesson. Even if you have nothing, you never act like you're defeated. That respect for inherent dignity became Robert's true north, his inner compass.
And that led to his personal constitution, these core rules he lives by.
Yep, 3 clear rules. Rule number 1, never make decisions based on fear.
Which is huge in business, where FOMO, fear of missing out, is rampant.
Totally. If a deal felt rushed, desperate, driven by scarcity, he'd walk. Even if it meant losing millions that others were chasing. That takes incredible self-awareness and strength.
Trusting your gut over the noise. What's rule 2?
Reputation is more valuable than revenue.
We saw that with the $1 million contract he turned down.
Yeah, refusing partnerships if ethics didn't align, turning down that speaking gig because the organization treated its staff poorly. He'd ask himself, if I say yes, what story am I telling myself about who I am?
Wow, that's holding yourself to a high standard. And the third rule?
Your identity must survive success. This one's critical, especially with fame.
Because success can change people, warp their values.
For sure. When Shark Tank exploded, he made a quiet rule. No saying yes just to boost his ego. No reality shows, endorsements, media deals that made him richer but not prouder.
He measures success by alignment, not just dollars or fame.
Exactly. He asked those questions. Does this honor the boy in the basement? Does it make Dad proud? Does it align with the person I said I'd become? If not, he has the courage to say no. It's self-definition.
And that self-definition allows him to do things like step down from leadership roles without drama, like leaving Ciders in 2024.
Right. It wasn't retirement or failure. It was creating space. Space to think, to pivot, to build the next thing with full presence.
In a world screaming more, 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 he models enough, not out of weakness, but as intentional self-definition.
Because success without a soul is failure in disguise. That inner compass is non-negotiable.
It really forces you to ask, how often do I make choices out of fear or ego? What's my personal constitution? Am I willing to walk away from things that don't align, even if they look good on paper?
Tough questions.
Yeah.
But essential for integrity. And this principled approach defines his leadership style too, which might differ from the TV image.
Yeah, people see the charismatic shark, but you said people who work with him see something else.
They say he doesn't lead with power, he leads with principle. That's the key difference.
Oh, he was even hesitant about Shark Tank initially, because TV rewards noise.
Exactly. And he had spent his life refining silence, refining disciplined execution. He ultimately did the show for scale, to teach integrity to entrepreneurs.
If I can teach one entrepreneur how to build with integrity, it's worth it. That was his reasoning.
Pretty much. It wasn't about his fame, it was about mentorship on a massive scale. And you see that in his investment choices on the show.
He often goes for the underdogs, right? The immigrants, the first-timers.
Yes, because he sees himself. The kid with no English, no connections, nothing but grit. It's deeply empathetic. He listens more than he talks on set, mentors more than he markets off set.
So his influence isn't built on hype?
Not at all. It's built brick by brick through relationships, trust, and decades of quiet consistency. His view on power is telling. Power is how long people trust you when you're gone.
That explains the loyalty. Employees stay for years, partners come back.
Even as kids adopt similar discipline despite their wealth. It's the power of emulation.
He values stability and substance over disruption and attention.
Right. He earns influence by example. He once said, the greatest compliment isn't being admired, it's being quietly emulated.
He teaches calm execution, not hustle culture. Ground success and routine, respect responsibility.
His message is clear. Don't be impressed by what I have. Be curious about how I think. His legacy is that discipline-driven leadership.
So how can you cultivate influence through quiet consistency and principle instead of just chasing attention? It's a different path, but clearly a powerful one.
And this long game thinking naturally extends to how he manages crises in his own career evolution.
Hmm.
He doesn't really believe in retirement.
It's about repositioning.
Exactly. Like in 2021, selling the majority stake in the Herjavec Group to Apex Partners after building it to over $200 million in revenue.
Most would see that as the exit, cash out, sail into the sunset.
But he stayed on as CEO. Why? Because he saw the cybersecurity landscape shifting dramatically. New threats, new tech, new competition.
So bringing in partners like Apex wasn't admitting defeat, it was strategic scaling.
Precisely. He had the humility to know he needed partners to grow faster and adapt. He said, if your ego needs to own 100%, you'll never grow past yourself. That's huge. Letting go of ego for growth.
And we saw that again in 2024 when he stepped down from Siders, the merged company, quietly. No drama.
Just that clear message. It's time to clear space for what's next. He plays that different game compound influence over quarterly results. Proactive detachment is part of the strategy.
Which leads to his crisis strategy. It's not reactive panic, it's proactive pruning.
Right. 3 parts. First, act early, not react late. He anticipates burnout, conflict, market shifts, and moves before they become crises.
Second,
Shrink to sharpen. If the system gets bloated, cut it. If the schedule gets noisy, retreat. If a role feels stale, retool or step aside. It's about maintaining clarity and focus.
protecting energy and values. And the third,
Legacy over optics. He's willing to look smaller today if it sets up something greater tomorrow. No overextending, no overcommitting.
he keeps quoting his father's advice too.
Leave before they have to ask you to go. That idea saved him from bad deals, bad partnerships, businesses that would trap him.
It's radical in our grind till you drop culture. He actually pauses, reflects, retreats strategically.
That's the difference between hustlers who burn out and builders who build again. He's playing the 25-year game.
Where patience isn't weakness, it's power.
Exactly. So how can you apply that? Proactively shrink to sharpen, know when to leave before they ask. In your career, your projects, even your personal life, it's about longevity.
So wrapping this all up, it's clear. Robert Herjavec's empire wasn't built on being the smartest, fastest, or loudest.
Nope. It was built on being the most disciplined. When others cracked, he adapted. When others chased applause, he walked toward quiet, consistent work.
While others asked, how do I win? He asked, how do I last?
And the core truth here, the counterintuitive part, is that discipline equals freedom. The freedom to say no, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to choose your response when chaos hits.
Every deal, every dollar was a quiet rebellion against that basement.
That basement wasn't a source of pity. It was the origin of his power. He built from it. And that's the lesson, maybe, in our world of instant gratification.
Real success isn't built in flashy moments. It's built in those quiet mornings when nobody's watching.
The world sees the shark, the millionaire. But underneath is that boy who made a vow. I will never be powerless again. That's the iron discipline.
So if you're listening, maybe feeling like you're in your own basement, debt, loneliness, burnout, fear, remember where he started. Nothing. No money, no English, no guarantees.
But he had a decision. To show up every day,
Yeah.
even when no one watched.
And you have that same power. It's not about waiting for motivation. It's about choosing discipline.
Because that one tiny habit done every single day really can change your whole story.
If this deep dive resonated, maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone feeling stuck in their own basement. We hope it gives you some powerful tools to build something that doesn't just succeed, but truly lasts.